For today, let's talk about why European imports work way better than Korean imports in the LCS League. And people are already gonna be like, actually, Impact and Someday are two of the best imports we've ever had in North America, and therefore your point is already trash. But let's go through this one by one, and let me explain why I personally think that Korean imports should stop being so popular in the LCS and they should rather focus on European players. So, the core of the issue here is the culture between these three regions, Europe, Korea and North America. Everybody knows that Europe and North America are way closer in culture than Korea is, and that's not a knock against anybody, that's just the reality of how history shook out. Let's talk about the elephant in the room though. Impact and Core JJ are the two poster charts of Korean imports that have functioned well in North America, and those, I would argue, are the outliers of the system. And I purposely left out Sunday because he is not exactly an import that worked 100% well, and I'll explain that in a second. So of course there are imports from Korea that have worked well in North America, but you should not expect that whenever an org nowadays announces a new imported player from Korea. Let's talk about Someday first. He came over as the best top laner in the world, barring Smap. People might not know this nowadays for some reason, but he was the MVP in Korea in 2015 summer. The same summer where SKT looked far and away like the best team in the world and dominated their entire league and the World Championship in the autumn as well. So Someday got the MVP of the league back then, and in 2016 he was runner-up for MVP in the LCK twice. And you might not know this, but in Korea you're not MVP if the MVP isn't decided by some sort of a voting or anything. It is some sort of a voting, but it's directly influenced by the Player of the Game awards that are given out after every game. So what winning an MVP in Korea actually means is that you were voted the Player of the Game for the most games out of any player in the league. And Someday won that award in 2015 summer and came runner-up in 2016 in both splits in Korea. So then in 2017 he comes over to North America as the best top laner in the world, barring Smap. Trust me, every expert is gonna agree with me that this is a reasonable statement. Although some people might propose some other players at the time, this was consensus at this point in time. So what does he do in North America? He comes over and joins Team Dignitas, finishing 6th in 2017 spring, getting half as many Player of the Game votes as his mid laner, who was fucking keen. And he only got 3rd All-Pro in that spring. Okay, he took some time to adjust, he did better in summer. He got 1st All-Pro team there, best top laner in the league, 5th place overall with his team, most Player of the Game votes on his team then in summer. Okay, so he did perform quite well in summer. 2018, sort of the same story. He's in 100 Thieves then, 3rd All-Pro team. And they win the league in the actual split, but then get completely shit on in the finals of the playoffs. Fair enough, they made the finals at least. He got 3rd All-Pro team in that spring, and a teammate of his won the MVP. So he was, at least in the community's eyes, not even the best player on his team. Only got 1 Player of the Game vote for the entirety of the spring split. In summer then again he performs better, he gets the most Player of the Game votes in his team and he comes 1st All-Pro team. Then in 2019 he gets completely shafted by his org, doesn't look insanely good when he's playing, but then gets benched not for performance reasons but for team structure reasons. And after that in 2020, sure, he looked good, again gets some All-Pro positions, but nothing special afterwards. So Someday came over as the best top lane in the world behind Smap, and he performed like he dominated the league at times, but not decisively and not by carrying every game. He mostly was known for sort of like Impact, never getting shit on and just holding his own in every game, which is of course impressive, and I personally am a big fan of his. But you have to admit that for the best top laner in the world, behind Smap, that isn't enough. You can't just come to NA and be one of the best players and not carry the entire carry games for your team. You can't just play Maokai and well contribute at whatever a tank player is gonna contribute. That's not what the best top laner in the world does. So of course he performed well. He was a good player. He was a rock in all his teams, and his personal skill might have only dipped now in this year actually, 2021. But that's not the point of this video. The point is that imports from Korea typically don't function as well as European imports because of cultural differences. And cultural differences are totally what screwed over Someday in his career in North America. And I'll explain that in a bit. Of course, the other two players, Impact and CoreDJ, are very much outliers to this rule, and they somewhat prove it. Impact was a top 3 top laner ever since he came over. He's an evergreen player, seemingly never seems to dip in performance long term. Surely performs a bit iffy sometimes in spring or during the regular portions of the seasons, but always performs when it matters, never gets shit on, never costs his team a series, and internationally even totally held his own against players like the Shy when he was when they matched it against them in MSI 2019. So what's the point here? These players, Impact, CoreDJ, and somewhat Someday, but I won't put him up in that tier. Those are the best case scenarios for Koreans coming over. The worst case scenarios are some no-name Korean players that got imported just because they were Korean, whose names you don't even remember anymore. I won't list them here. There's players like this in every split of the LCS pretty much ever since they started importing Koreans, and that's the worst case scenario. But the interesting thing is, what is the reasonable expectation of a Korean player that got imported into the LCS over the past couple of years? And the well-ish functioning Korean players are Rush, Lustboy, Piglet, Phoenix, Rainover, Lyra, Arrow. Notice any common trend with those people that are named? They're fucking irrelevant nowadays. None of these people don't even play anymore. No Flame. I mean, they did have some good portions of their careers, but think about what they did as imports in North America. Most of these people just came over, played 1 or 2 incredible, good, decent splits, and then fell off and did fuck all afterwards. People such as Lyra and Arrow literally won an MVP award in their first splits here, then dipped in performance until they were irrecognizable as imports and looked just like the NA players around them. So why is that? And the crucial thing is, apart from maybe Febiven and Jizuke, and I would debate you on those, there's no European players that look like that. I mean, players that start out looking like elite players and then get complacent or whatever happens until they just look like the other NA players around them. There's no European players that look like this. European imports either come in and don't function, don't work, fail and leave again, or they come in looking decent and then either keep their level or improve while they are in North America. Korean imports never do that. They either come here and fail, like there's European imports as well. Mithy, Yellowstar, those players couldn't adjust. And I'm not claiming, by the way, that European imports can't fail, but they're just way more likely to succeed. Koreans are either gonna be too obedient or too egotistical. That's my main point with this video here. The Korean culture does not fit well with North America's League of Legends scene. And my prime example for this one is actually Someday. On a recent co-stream with Doublelift and Sneaky, Meteos recounted an experience of his with Someday on his team, and he said that Someday would always, whenever the team asked him to play a specific champion, mostly a tank. And Meteos would say it was kind of a meme in the team that Someday would always go, if Kochi wants, I can play Sion. If Kochi wants, I can play Maokai. And these things. And I mean, he's trying to be a good teammate there, but that's not what your star player does. He's supposed to be the best fucking top laner in the world, at least the best fucking top laner in North America. Imagine that. I mean, I'm not from North America, so I'm not going to give you an NA sports reference here, but imagine if Didier Drogba in the 2012 Chelsea squad would have went to his coach and said, yeah, well, actually, if you think I should be a little bit more of a team player and I should pass the ball more often and I shouldn't just try score all these goals myself, then I'll try that. No, he was the best player on the team. He was the only guy that all their success hinged on, at least in the offensive part of the game. And he won them the fucking Champions League where they had no business even being in the finals. So this is not how the star player of the team, if you're the best player in the team and you recognize that this team is a middle of the pack squad with no special players besides you, then you're supposed to be the guy who says, fuck that, man, I'm not playing Sion. If I'm playing Sion here, there's no way these guys carry the game. If you want to win championships, if you're at least trying to go to finals, then please, man, don't say if coach wants, I'll do Sion. No, you say this is how we win the game here. These are the picks I can take. This is what I need from you guys, and then you carry the game. Other than that, get the fuck out of there with your $1 million a year salaries. And that's the next point. Even if your top Korean imports work out as well as you dreamed, even then, they're just going to be so much more expensive than European imports that you could get. So why even bother gambling? You already have the difficult culture to integrate in North America, and then you're going to pay them extra somehow? That's not how these things work, man. Look at what happened to Bang. I bet he had a banger contract, but geez, man, the guy played fine in many games, but not 5 times as well as other people, such as Sven or whatever. I mean, Cody-san at that point in time even. So what the fuck is up with these salaries? And you're gambling so much with these guys. I've never understood that. Why they won't just go for decent, good, or even upcoming European players. So what does this argument boil down to? I'm arguing that Jensen and Bjergsen are the same type of outliers as Core, JJ, and Impact. From Europe as well as Korea, there's these two guys who are just outliers to the rule, who just adjusted especially well because they personally just fit in there. Or in the case of Bjergsen, he more so got made into a shape where he fit in there, I suppose. But Impact especially is just one of these guys. He's not a Korean, you know? Just like his former coach Reaper, these are the types of guys that aren't shaped by Korean culture in a way that, well, that's too different from North America, or at least they were able to adjust, but that's not the norm. Jensen and Bjergsen are the same types of outliers as Core JJ and Impact. Now, the guys I listed earlier, Rush, Lustboy, Rainover, Arrow, these guys, this is the expected result of a good Korean player that you import. Now compare them with these guys that I listed from Europe. Centaurin, Power of Evil, Niski, Sven, and Svenskeren. These are what I would argue the median level imports from Europe. They aren't just amazing all the time that they're here, but they come over, they might have some troubles at the start, they adjust, they work on the problems, and they end up being decent, good, or even star players that you can build teams around in North America. And again, this is what I think you can expect from most European imports that you make. Not everyone's gonna fit well into your team. Some people aren't gonna make the adjustment at all. That's always a risk when you import players, but that's even always a risk with some academy talent or young NA players. Some of them aren't gonna make it. But if you import already made players from Europe or Korea, the chance that the European guy is going to work out eventually after 1 or 2 years after adjusting is so much higher than with these Korean players. So to sum it up, Europeans might not have that huge initial skill gap, but since their culture fits better, they are more likely to be able to adjust and assimilate, and therefore more likely to retain their level or even improve in North America. Koreans, on the other hand, often are way ahead in skill when coming over, but then fail to integrate properly, not necessarily due to a lack of them trying or anything, just because the culture gap makes it a little bit harder for them. And thus, they almost never reach their full potential and most of the time get worse quickly. And I mean quickly. Lyra looked like a shitter jungler just the split of the year after he won MVP. Same thing goes for Arrow. Rainover looked like a god on Immortals and then looked like, I mean, like Kiwi Kid of the jungle when he played for Team Liquid. Phoenix and Piglet always looked like they had a talent, but their personality was in the second tier, like of those two egotistical players that just wouldn't or couldn't adjust their play. Rush is sort of the same thing. He looked like a star player, won the MVP after coming over, just like Lira and Arrow, but then later in his career just couldn't keep up anymore with the level needed. And those players, think about it as well, those players are so much more expensive than the comparable level of play from Europe. So NA teams, my point is that you need a very specific type of person or very specific types of people for them to be able to function properly in North America. And those people are more likely to be found in Europe than in Korea. Doesn't matter if you're importing the best players from both regions. It doesn't matter if you import solid players from both regions. Doesn't matter if you import rookies from both regions. This rule stands, and if you want to make smarter investments in general, I advise you look towards Europe, not to Korea. And before Jack at the end starts accusing me of racism or something, again, I'm referring only to the culture gap and the difficulties adjusting. I'm not generalizing here. I'm not saying that Koreans can't work out in North America. I just try to explain in a very short and comprehensive fashion why I think the European imports are the way to go.